Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. We are launching the ACM Trends Data Hub. And so in this webinar, we wanted to just share with you a little kind of background about this and then walk you through the Data Hub. And today joining us with this presentation is the team from ACM, as well as the team from Knology, who are our research partners on this project. So before we get going, I wanted to just do some quick introductions, and for the rest of the team, I'm going to just have you quickly just say who you are and maybe your title. So I'm Jen Raykamp, Director of Field Services and Research here at ACM. Blythe, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, my name is Blythe Romano, and I am a research assistant at ACM. And I'll pass it on to Sean.
Hey everybody, Sean Field from Knology. I'm a researcher and project manager. I've been working with ACM for the last 4 or 5 years.
Okay, and I'm John Voiklis, also from Knology. I lead all sorts of different research, and I've been working on ACM for about as long as Sean, maybe a little longer.
Yeah, I think so. Wonderful, thank you. And then thank you all for joining us. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is just the brief agenda. So this is something that we're now calling the ACM Trends Program, and I'm going to describe that in just a minute. And then the next part of the agenda here is going to be using the most recent trends report we have about 6.2, which is announcing the Data Hub, but then also discussing some of the ways of analyzing that data. And John Voiklis is going to walk us through that very briefly. We'll also provide a link to it. And then Sean is really going to drive the majority of the conversation, is going to walk you all through the ACM Trends Data Hub. And then as we're going through, since we have a decent amount of people on today, I was going to have you use the chat to pose some questions or comments. We should have some opportunities while Sean is in the Data Hub to answer some of those questions. And then once we get out, we can also do some follow-up conversations there. But feel free to use the chat to pose questions, and we'll all be paying attention to that. Next slide. Okay, so this is going to just be our project overview. Go ahead, next slide. So the ACM Trends Program. So this project started, it's an Institute of Museum and Library Services project. So it's a US-based federal agency providing grants to museums throughout the US. This was started in 2019. And it really, the motivation behind this was really to, in partnership with Knology, to take a look how ACM was collecting data and disseminating data, trying to identify ways to make that process more efficient and more relevant to museums. So various different things have happened throughout this project, and the Data Hub is kind of that final big, huge output of the project. So throughout the project, we really have been refining the way we collect operational data from all of you, primarily looking at US 990s. We also recognize that the ACM Trends reports are still a very useful way of conveying some of that data in really bite-sized, easily readable, easily understandable pieces. So we wanted to keep that as a component of this. And then, of course, the building of the Data Hub is the final piece. All of these together, we are now kind of transitioning and calling the ACM Trends Program. So that's because we reference that, that's what we mean. So we mean the data collection, the trends reports, and the Data Hub. And as you can see, there are some other partners on here as well. Habitat 7 is the company that we used to help create the actual Data Hub, which you will see the online dashboard, and then the rest of that website. And then Blackbaud served as kind of an advisor to this project, primarily because they do a lot of work in creating dashboards for their clients and using data to kind of share out. So they kind of guided us, and they also provided some insight in terms of how museums collect data on your sites if you use, for instance, their all-true system. So that was kind of helpful for us when we were really developing the data hub and trying to build this out and recognizing what data you all collect. Next slide. Okay, I think, Sean, we're both doing this one, but you can start us off. So for the actual data hub, the information that we have on there right now, which we have just updated, if anyone was on there a little bit earlier, we did have this link available to folks if you were at, for instance, our conference in April. We just updated it. We have included, it should be included all of ACM member museums. There are some non-member museums as well, but the focus was really ACM member museums. The other thing I wanted to just say too is, again, the data right now is focused on US museums because we really were using the US tax form 990 to collect this information. That said, now that this is up, we are looking at how we could collect this data from museums outside of the United States. So I've already started having conversations, for instance, with some of our friends in Canada, and I'm going to also be talking with some folks in Europe to see if we can collect this same data so we can expand it. We also have plans to expand the number of museums that are on this data hub beyond just ACM members. That are based in the US that we can get 990s for. That will just give all of you a much richer data sample from which a lot of this information, we can get even better trends and all of that kind of information. So that's going to be coming kind of as we move forward. But this is what we have right now. I think, Sean, I'm going to pass it over to you now.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Jim was saying, this is all, for the most part, based on the US tax form 990 data that is publicly available that we have been able to access through both GuideStar, ProPublica, and for some of you, you have submitted that to us directly. And then information that we've collected through some of the ACM Analogy surveys that you probably have seen either Jen's emails about or taken those surveys yourself. And I will show you a little bit about how easy it is to take those surveys and update some of that data in a bit. When we get into the data hub, what you'll be able to see are visual representations of attendance, income, expenses, staffing, and other categories that are of importance for general Children's Museum operations. These visual representations will be of individual museums, and then you'll be able to benchmark against other museums or even the national average, and we'll get into that a little bit more. As well, the Data Hub will be the new home of the trend reports. All of them will be accessible there to you all from 1.1 to the one that was just released today, 6.2, which is on this Data Hub and talking about national averages and how to look at those. So as we update and make new trends reports, they will live there as well as on ACM's website as blogs, but the PDFs will be able to be downloaded. And we'll show you all of this in a little bit. Next slide.
Just wanted to add one more thing before we go forward. There will be, and Sean's going to walk you through this, but if you're looking at specifically data about your museum and you see anything that's missing or incorrect, there will be a place on the Data Hub where you can send us the updated information, even the 990 form, and Sean's going to show that to you. But just if you're kind of getting in there as we're walking through this and notating some of that, you will have an opportunity to let us know and update your information. Okay, go ahead.
So we are looking at the US Form 990, and I know you all know that there are multiple versions of this, depending on what type of organization you are, how you are funded, or the amount of money that you are bringing in a given fiscal year. But for the most part, the majority of museums are filling out the standard Form 990, which is what you see here on the screen. This is an image of the 2022 990, and I wanted to put that there because every year there might be a little bit of a change, but for the most part, all of the things that we have been taking from 2016 until 2021 exist in 2022. And so we'll continue to collect that information as new 990s come out. There may be an opportunity for you all to submit those before they even go public to GuideStar or ProPublica. So we can obviously talk about that. But what I want to just note is that we are specifically pulling numbers from particular lines on these 990s. So total number of individual employed on line 5 is what you'll see as the representation of staff. Line 9, where it says program services revenue, you'll see that exactly represented as program service revenue. And we're particularly looking at that as money that you are generated from your general operations, those activities, the attendance, the people coming through the door. Line 15, we are taking a look at those salaries and compensation, and we're calling that labor expenses. And then we are doing a combination of those other lines on 13, 14, 16, and 17 to calculate what is called non-labor expenses. And you'll see that on the Data Hub. And those are two pieces of a component that make up line 18, your total expenses, right? So you'll see all of that. The other things that we are taking are line 19, revenue less expenses, which you'll see on the Data Hub as net revenue. And we are looking at some of this other data, such as investment income and other things like volunteers, but we're not necessarily displaying it. We're using it in the back end to create something called normalized data and showing things that we can talk a little bit more as we open up and demonstrate the Data Hub. But here you have a 990, you're all probably familiar with it. And just so you know, if you are submitting a 990 EZ or a 990 T or any other version of a 990, because you are funded by a foundation or because you make less money than the threshold to fill out a full 990, there will be pockets of information that currently are missing on the Data Hub, but we have avenues of collecting that. Right now we are launching, and the majority of museums, as I said, will have the full suite of 990 information, and I'll show you exactly how we can submit data in the future.
Okay. So yeah, you've already heard a bunch about the new Trends Report 6.2, which is about the Data Hub and about the important, given that lots of times the Trends Reports cover a bit of statistical literacy, it explains our use of national averages and the choices we made there. So, and as you've heard the Data Hub, you'll be able to benchmark against the national average and against other museums that either you choose based on their location or choice or whatever reason you choose the other museum you want to benchmark against. So, and what's explained in 6.2 is why we use the median value as the average for the 294 member museums and a bunch of non-member museums that are included in the Data Hub. And if you look at these two, this slide and these two representations, you'll see why the median, which is the sort of middle value, is the center of gravity. If you look at across the graph on the right-hand side, most of the dots, which means most of the museums, hover pretty close to each other. Then you have a few extreme values that are, in the negatives or in the high positives. If we were to just take the mean, that's what's being shown in the table next to the figure. You see how much the values end up getting pulled in one direction or another. So if we were to take the mean for 2016, the mean value is 226,000 and some change, while the median is close to 16. Same thing. Yes.
Can I jump in? So is there another way to say that too? Is the median is really looking at, it's trying to eliminate those outliers, or it's showing you where the middle is without kind of bringing in some of those outliers, whereas the median would include that. Okay.
Yes, the median handles, so yes, handles the outliers that would skew the data and make it look like that the numbers are not comparable. And let's see, was there any other detail that we wanted to say about that?
I'll just answer the one the one question that's in the chat briefly. So with 2021, I know it is June 2023, but we don't yet have a full set of 2021 990s available to us. We expect those numbers to shift a bit, but not significantly. This is what we have at current. 218 museums have publicly available 990s through ProPublica and GuideStar. I'm sure some of you have them that have not been updated there on either GuideStar or ProPublica that we could get directly from you, and we can update these numbers and send out a new version of this once we have a full set. But as of current, that's what we have. The one thing I will say is the number on the data hub will represent what we have at current, but every time we update it with new data, and we'll do that pretty regularly, that 218 number will go up, and that number of median net revenue will adjust with it.
Yeah, and here's a little bit of a statistical lesson as well, in that the numbers will not move a lot. Once you get above 30 things that you are measuring, here being 30 museums, both the mean and the median tend to stabilize. What you actually will see is, the values will change very slightly. In fact, as we approach 300, that is what's often called the law of large numbers, which means that you could predict, if suddenly there were 600 museums in the world, or children's museums in the world, you would still be able to say that's probably the mean and the median. Anyways, enough of statistical lessons.
And yes, to answer your question, Steve, in the chat, net revenue is that line 19 on the 990. So truly the bottom line, it is what you are reporting as income that comes in minus, or what they say, revenue less expenses, right? Revenue minus the expenses that you make. And in some cases, that is a negative number. So if you are spending more than you bring in, obviously that's going to be negative. And in some cases that's positive. And you can see here, particularly in the case of 2020, for example, that it's a difference between the mean and the median, right? The mean is a positive number, while the median is really showing that the middle museum, and most museums are really hovering around that middle, are going to be closer to break even or a negative number, rather than that $75,000 of net revenue or revenue less expenses. Cool, I think we can go to the next slide. Great, so we're going to jump into a demonstration of the Data Hub in a minute, but again, what you can do with this Data Hub is access your museum's data and all other museums that we've talked about, their data as well. You'll be able to benchmark against them based off location, size, and city, all of those fun things. And you'll be able to submit your data, as you said. Things to consider is that everything is fiscal year, and some of the impacts from the pandemic start to show in fiscal year 2019. And so the reason for that is if your fiscal year starts in September or October, you started October 2019, and so you had about 5 or 6 months of pandemic impact, we will say. So we understand that not everything, particularly in 2019 and 2020, and in some cases 2021, are all on level playing fields. However, this is a way to be able to understand and think about, okay, my museum versus another museum, what are we looking at? How are the trends from 2016 to 2021? And like, as we said, we'll have 2022, we'll have 2023, and we'll continue to update this and show that sort of post-pandemic impact as well. Museums part of large consortiums are not included in the national average, but will show up on the Data Hub. So an organization like Thanksgiving Point, you all are a consortium of multiple different cultural institutions, and your 990 reflects all of those cultural institutions. And so we removed those from the national averages that you'll see, but we still have shown you for now. And our goal is to figure out if there's a way to update that for the one particular children's museum set. So some of the data for those museums will be updated as we go. It's just a case of we don't want to muddy the waters with an organization's 990 in those national averages that represents more than a children's museum.
Sorry, I want to just jump in here too. So I think, and you may be getting to this, I'm sorry, but for those that are also part of, for instance, university systems, or maybe you're part of parks, or like a park system, we weren't again able to get information from a 990 for just your institution. So if you do have that available, that information available that you want to share, you can send it to us. And again, Sharon's going to show you how, but you are not, that's the reason, if you're trying to look for yourself and you're not there, that's the reason why. And again, I just want to emphasize the reason why we're using the 990 data is we wanted to lessen the survey burden on you all. We know this is information that you have to report annually anyway. And so we were really trying to look at ways we could use existing data that for you all to be useful, to benchmark, to plan for future, that kind of thing. So that's really why we were focusing on this information. Right.
And it's also the information that we used for determining size, as I will elaborate on a little bit later.
Yeah.
So what are some of the use cases for this? Hopefully advocacy, facilitating discussions between museums, understanding what they are doing to achieve some of the numbers that you might see and might strive for, and some planning, right? If you feel like you are in a place and you're seeing it after benchmarking at a couple of museums that you want to, increase that revenue stream, thinking about what does this look like, using this data hopefully to understand, and maybe even to work with your boards to understand where you fit in the national scheme of children's museums. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Blythe, you can stop on the presentation, and we will do a walkthrough of the Data Hub, which hopefully you all can see. Please let me know if you can't. Jen, any issues? Can you see it?
You can see it. Yeah, you're good.
Awesome. So this is the Data Hub. It is a part of the ACM website. So you'll be able to access it either through the Data Hub, either through the link that was provided in the chat, or via the ACM website. It'll also show up in multiple places on the Knology website. So, you'll have access to it, and Jen or I can always share it with you if you forget this URL. Pretty simple, datahub.childrensmuseums.org. So simple homepage, a little bit of the about what this is. We've sort of covered that. I don't want to talk about that too much. You'll be able to access the trends reports, as I mentioned. You'll be able to click this button, learn more, or the trends report button over here on the left to access all of those. And I'll show you them in a minute. A little bit more about the Data Hub and the data collection methods we are using. New information might pop up on this main page, but it's really not the draw. It's the main page of just to show you, give you a little bit of context, right? And then at the bottom here, there'll be a rotating set of trends reports. So if you're new to a museum and you're like, I don't know what these trends reports are, you'll get a sample of them right here. And if you click on one of them, let's click on this one, it will open up the PDF right there. You'd be able to download it, save it. And the only thing that we say when using these, if you're using them in any sort of publication of any kind, each trends report has a citation at the bottom that you're able to use. And to understand where this information came from in your presentations, et cetera, there's a citation for you to use. So like I said, there's a sample of them over here. Right now we have 1.1, I believe this is 5.1 and 6.1 here. They'll rotate. I'll update them occasionally. And just a way to sort of have a little bit of a sample. Another button right here to click to get to the trends report. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. It's the same button as on the left, the trend report button, so it takes you to the same place. Right now, what you have is the list of all the trends reports here and every single one of the PDFs. If I click on this one, for example, it will pull up Trends Report 1.2. I clicked on 1.2, Small Museums, Priorities, Opportunities for Growth. Again, you can download, and each of these trends reports are either 1 page or 4 pages. You may have seen them before, you may have used them before. You have access to all of them here. So a repository free of charge as part of the Data Hub. All of these things are accessible. Feel free to share this link. You can see the URL is just with /trends at the end. Scrolling all the way to the bottom, 6.2, our newest release, what John was just mentioning, is accessible here. I know Jen shared it in the chat. 6.2 is accessible here. If you're interested in it, you're able to find, and again, it talks about this Data Hub and the national averages. Just scrolling quickly through, you'll see the image that we just showed. It shows up right here in the report, along with the table and some other fun graphics as well, and representations of the Data Hub. So trends reports, easy enough to understand. They're all here. You can have, have fun reading them. And yeah, they're all here. The one thing I'll mention also, all the way at the top here, you can sort by report number or by title. We'll add new features here and there. So maybe like by topic, but right now it's report number and by title. Great. Just gonna go quickly over to the About page, unless there's any questions on the trends reports. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. The About page is going to, and takes a second to load here. There we go. So the About page gives you a little bit more in depth about what this is. And as you know, this is a Data Hub that was collaboratively built by ACM and Knology. And it is funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And we're very grateful to them to be able to do this. So let's get into the fun part, the Data Hub. Here you go. So this is the initial thing. If you click the Data Hub over here on the left, this is initially what you'll see. I'm going to scroll through. I'm going to talk about each of these things. Where I want you to focus right now is this middle column here, where it says total attendance, non-labor expenses, and so forth. And then I'll go over to the right column in a minute. All of these numbers that you see here on each of these different pieces, right, are 2021 numbers. It's based off of the information that we currently have for 2021. What you can see is a graphical representation of the national average, as you can see up here in blue, for attendance from 2016 to 2021. So if I scroll over 2021, national average, 42,102, it's the same number that you'll see up here. If you were interested in, wow, 2016, what was the national average? 148,084. Great. So you can see that there is obviously that pandemic impact there, right? And you see the national trend in attendance. We expect that to have gone up as we get 2022 and 2023 numbers in. So you'll see that line move slightly up. And we do expect that number to go up in 2021 once we get more attendance data from you all. The one thing I will say about attendance, and I'll scroll down and we'll talk about the rest of it, is that attendance is the one data point on here where we don't have the majority of your data because it is submitted through a survey, and we do need you all to submit that information. It's not information that we can pull from the 990. So these numbers will change. This is where we're at with about 100 children's museums who have provided us attendance. And so, these numbers will change a bit, but we don't expect them to change a tremendous amount. Let's go down to non-labor expenses. Again, focusing in the middle, we'll go over to the right in a bit. Non-labor expenses are the first part here that you see that comes from the 990. And so it's the majority, 280, 290 of you, in the case of 2021, 218, I believe it was, who've provided, a 990 that we have access to this data. Non-labor expenses, you can see the trend again, 2016 to 2021. These are the expenses on those lines that are not associated with your salaries and compensation. Anything else that you're spending money on. The average in 2021, 349,259. Again, this is the national median, so it's that middle museum. Scrolling down, we have that other set, labor expenses. Then we have total expenses. Non-labor expenses and and labor expenses are two pieces of a puzzle for total expenses, right? How much is a museum spending in total? 637,954. That's the median museum. Your museum might be higher, your museum might be lower. The median museum is spending that amount of money in 2021. You can see the number was a bit higher, 2018, 2019, over in the 800,000 range, and dipped to the 600,000 range because of that COVID impact. Again, expected to maybe go up a bit, depending on how much you're spending on new installations, renovations, everything to build back after the pandemic. Staffing, again, this is one of those ones where we have most of your data, but not all of it. In the case of those who submit the 990 EZ, we don't have that done. We'll need to collect it, but the majority of folks have done a 990, regular 990, and you have this information here. So the average children's museum has 31 staff. That's both part-time and full-time combined. It's the equivalent of, full-time equivalent. Not so far down from where it was in 2019, 2018. So, stable pretty much, even though this graph looks like it's a big jump, it's jumping from 35 to 31. And then we have net revenue. This is that conversation that we were discussing in the chat. What is net revenue? It's that bottom line. It's that line 19 in the 990. So you have that here. And then finally, program services income. That's that income that you have collected from people coming through the door, those exhibits, those attendance fees, memberships, et cetera.
Hey, Sean, real quick with the program services income, there was a purposeful adjustment we made to this because I think that we were calling this earned income, but we decided to use 990 language with program services income, which encompassed, I think, some more information that was more universal. Again, because we're looking at 990 information, I just wanted to put that out there. That would somewhat align with what I think some of you probably would consider your earned income, is this program services. It's just as we were really digging into this number, we realized that not all museums report everything exactly the same. So we wanted to try and capture as much as we could as possible and make it as universal as possible. So that's what we wanted to do there. I just wanted to emphasize that. So that's why we're calling it that.
Yep, and that's what it's called on the 990 as well. So no change in name there. Great, so let's scroll back up here to the top. What you can see here, I think we have something in the chat. I can answer questions as they come, but I do want to talk about this right side first, and then we can answer some questions before showing some museum examples. So on the right side, what we've done here is provided a couple of different ways to think about the data. And so with attendance, for example, what you have there is a ratio of attendance to staff. So how many people are coming through the door that you are counting as your attendance for every one staff member. The average museum has about 13,050 people come through the door for every one staff member they have on staff. Interesting number. I'm not making any judgments on this, obviously. You all are the experts here on what that means to you. But just think about that as you're thinking about your attendance, how many people you're bringing, how many people you're bringing through the door, how many people, the sort of the touch factor, right? How many people does each staff member interact with on a given day or given month? So this is for a year. For every staff member, 13,000 are coming through the door. And again, these ratios are based off of 2021 numbers.
1,300, right? 1,300.
1,300, yes, sorry. As we scroll down, non-labor expenses, we have two different ratios here. We have non-labor expenses as a ratio to your total expenses. So 55% here for these total expenses for the median museum are spent on non-labor costs. as compared to 45% for labor expenses, which you see down here. So those two, again, are two pieces of the pie. Looking at non-labor expenses, the sub ratio, what we are saying here is compared to that earned income or that program services income that we were talking about, the Media Museum is spending about $2 on non-labor costs and about $1.60 on labor costs for every dollar they are bringing in for program services. So where's that difference being made up? In contributions, in gifts, in grants, in investments and rentals and parking and all the other things that you all have income. But just thinking about that in terms of how much you're spending for every dollar that you're bringing in from the attendance that you generate. This is sort of a way to do that. And you can look at the full ratio, this 3.6 to 1. So for every dollar you bring in program services income, for total expenses, spending about $3.6. Again, this is a median museum. Each of your museums is going to be a bit different. What we also have in the total expenses category is a way of thinking about expenses per attendance. So for every one person who comes through the door, how much is the median museum spending? They're spending $15.15, right? That is an expense ratio per every individual that's walking through the door as calculated by you all with your attendance calculations. Scrolling down to staff, what we have here is a ratio of staff to total volunteers. Pretty interesting, but what you're seeing here is that there's more volunteers at museums than there are staff at the median museum. It's pretty close. It's pretty close to 1-to-1, but about, you know, if you think about this in terms of 10, right? For every 10 volunteers, you have 9 staff. That's sort of a way to think about that. Or for every 100 volunteers, you have 90 staff, right? Thinking about it that way, we have it here as for every 1 volunteer, you have 0.89 staff. And then finally, 2 other ones, net revenue and program services income. Net revenue, we have it a ratio here for total income to total expenses. So here it's interesting, right? The average museum is in the positive. So what you have on the left-hand side is a larger number than 1. And so for every dollar that you're spending, you're bringing in $1.36, or for every $1.36 you are bringing in, you're spending $1. And so the income rate on each of those dollars is 36 cents that you're spending. And then on program services income, we have a ratio here of program services to total income. While we don't demonstrate total income here, it's a way to understand, okay, my total income is X amount for that year. How much am I getting from my program services? And you can see that the average or the median museum is only about 20% program services, and the rest is made up, again, contributions, gifts, grants, investments, rentals, all of that type of thing. The final one, program services to attendance. For every 1 person that's coming through the door, how much you are making, $4.21. You need to think about, where do you want to be as a museum, right? How much do you want to be counting as income for each attendee that comes through the door? Do you want to be at $10? Do you want to be around here at the national median, $4.21? So again, you'll be able to use this to benchmark against the national average and against your fellow museums. I just want to talk, just say quickly, for each of these ratios, there is a little question mark on each of them. So you see it here, that explains a bit more about what we show here. The other thing that you'll be able to do, and I'll show this right now, over here on the left-hand side, definitions. You can click definitions, and you'll be able to see a little bit more information about each of the definitions, both the regular ratio, the main ratio, and the sub ratio, as you can see here. I can go back and we can take any short questions before I jump into showing a couple of examples of museums.
Sean, there's a detailed question around net revenue, and in the chat, it says some museums do not fund depreciation, which could skew their net revenue down. Is there a way to adjust for this in the trends report? I think in the dashboard.
I think we need to know that from each individual museum in terms of how they are putting together their 990 and where that might show up and whether or not that would decrease or increase the number, and how significantly that would. I don't
So
necessarily.
maybe that's something an individual museum would take into consideration when looking particularly at this national average or at other museums.
Right.
Regarding what that might include. So this would not take it. So this is purely just taken from the 990. So whatever skews those numbers, that's just the caveat there, I guess is probably the best thing to say to kind of understand or to just analyze this. Does that help? I hope that helps. Okay, cool. And then another question, 2021 income for many nonprofits includes PPP funds and employee retention tax credits. Any way to adjust for that? So again, I think that's probably the same thing, but go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we did during the pandemic was collect a lot of information on what types of funding you were receiving to make up some of those costs. And you can see that this number, and it's probably a reason why this number is so low, program services in 2021 is 20% rather than say 45% or 50% of total income. But to that question, almost every museum received PPP in some way and received PPP to a portion of their regular or standard sort of operating budgets. So I think the best way to think about that is that it's almost a level playing field for all in terms of PPP, in terms of a proportion of that total income. We would have to do a lot of extra data collection to understand how much PPP truly is. But if I think about it in terms of the information we previously collected, the way in which PPP was doled out, I think that it's pretty much a good bet to consider as you're looking at this, that each museum is going to have a similar proportion to their total income that was PPP in 2021.
And just as a further reference, volume 4 of our trends reports covers all of our pandemic reporting and data collection. And as Sean mentioned, this specific topic is in that volume. I need to go back and look to see which report it exactly is. But this was, we did give out some of those numbers. So that could be a reference to when analyzing this, is to take that report into consideration.
Well, and also I would add that, the purpose of this is also benchmarking, which allows for some approximation, because you will be able to see the differences, or similarities, even if there are some caveats along the way. A few dollars, a few cents. I mean, not that it's going to be a few dollars or a few cents, but always when benchmarking, rounding error is okay, is one of the ways to think about this. But yes, do also refer to the trends reports.
Right. Well, because the trends reports will give you an idea of what is the national average in terms of who received, the amount of museums that received PPP funding. I think we also talked a little bit about the amounts or the percentage. And so that's just good reference to see. The same thing as with looking at the median. Where does your museum fall? Is it higher or is it lower than that in terms of how you're analyzing the national average?
And volume 4, as Jen said, so it starts with 4.1 here, museums and pandemic, so on and so forth. All called museums and pandemic, but different things. Particularly 4.13, patterns in fundraising, which was done in 2021 and was with our May 2021 COVID-19 survey. Around that, we'll give you some of that information there. And same here, mid-May 2020. So if you're interested in thinking about, okay, what is the pandemic impact potentially, or what is that PPP impact, et cetera, those trends reports, 4.13, so 4.13, 4.2, and some of the other ones will be there to help think about the data. Same for workforce. If you're thinking about staff and you're looking at it, you're like, those numbers seem a little weird to me. You can look and see on 4.13 or 4.3, I should say, museums in a pandemic workforce impacts. And I think we do a second one later on. That one was 2020. So all accessible here again on the Data Hub for you to look at. If there's no further questions, I'm going to jump in to just show a couple of examples of individual museums and some of the benchmarking, some of the things. So what I just showed you was all the national average, right? That median museum. Up here, you'll see a big button that says select a museum to get started. We're going to click that. And what you'll be able to do is select museums based off of a couple of different filters. Region, see here, click that down. These regions come from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. These are regions that are distinct. They include specific states. And so if you are in that state or in that territory, you belong in that region. Obviously, all the states are here. And as you drill down, let's take California, for example, we can jump in and say, okay, Los Angeles or Monterey, et cetera. This is all coming from hand entered data. If something is off and you say, oh, my city is actually, a particular town and you really you don't want it to say Los Angeles, but you want to say a suburb of Los Angeles, we can easily update that, easy enough. And then you'll be able to search by museum size. And these are the size categories that John was referring to. John, do you want to mention a little bit about how sizing is done with the museums?
Yes. So, as Sean has already said, the Data Hub is here to help you with operations. So we thought about, ACM already had size categories, which are also included in one of the views that we can't see right now. There we go, the ACM member level. But we wanted to think of what is your operating size? So we took 4 of these values that and sort of figured out how the combination of them creates a gradation, and then found places where you could find the joints, so to speak, such that you can create categories of sizes. And here Sean is showing the table, which shows the numbers that were used the last time we had full data and were able to, which was 2018. And we're able to do the calculations. I could tell you that I did a calculation today for the median museum, which I forgot to bring up earlier. And the median museum is actually a medium to small museum based on its combination of values. And we are getting ready, once we have all the 2022 data, or just 2021, we are going to redo the sizing because we suspect that some of you may have changed position, either grown or shrunk. And we also want to know in terms of what it looks like as a trend. Was this an even difference across the entire sector, or did some people change more than others?
So we have 5 minutes left, this hour has gone very quickly. So let me just show you quickly a couple of examples of what there is here. So Bucks County Children's Museum, I'm showing you the first one. Bucks County Children's Museum, I'm showing you because they have all of their data from 2016 to 2021. And so as you can see, this number, these ratios have changed from when it was just the national average. So let me actually go back to the national average real quick. The number is back to what it was for the national average. If I click Bucks County Children's Museum, they update for that. So the first museum that you select is the museum that you will start to show as with all those ratios. One of the things that I wanted to show is you are able to compare against other museums. Up here on the right-hand side, compare museums. You are able to select by state, city, museum size. One of the ones that I wanted to show, New Hampshire, there's New Hampshire. Children's Museum of New Hampshire is another medium-sized museum. So this is an example where there are 3 museums now on the graph. Again, these numbers are for that first one that you choose. The numbers for Children's Museum of New Hampshire won't show up until you select that first, and you can always change the selection up here. Select that first. The other thing you can do, toggle on and off the national average if you just want to show that versus another museum. So let's say you wanted to show 2 museums within the same region. So we'll change the selection. We'll go down to over here to Florida to show the Glazer Children's Museum, and we will compare that to a museum in Georgia, like the Children's Museum of Atlanta. These are 2 museums in the Southeast region. They are both large museums, and here is a comparison. You'll be able to see that throughout all of these different museums, and you can see they sort of track nicely between each other in terms of some of these things, both large, both in the same region, Tampa, Atlanta, in terms of those locations. Some things change, and this might, again, be one of those places where you facilitate a conversation of, oh, what are you doing to introduce people into museum? What are you doing in terms of building up that program services revenue? So those are, again, you can see against those 2. If you want, toggle the national average on and off. The one other one I just want to show you, we'll choose one from Texas, and this is not to call anybody out, but I just know that, actually we'll choose one from Vermont. I know that this museum does not yet have all of the data in. What you can see here, total attendance, we don't have that data yet. Easy enough to submit the data. You click either submit data here or submit data on the left. That would open up the survey. In here, easy enough, select your museum. Look at that, I already have it set up. And you're able to provide us with your fiscal year combined attendance, as well as upload your 990s here. So all of that is to say, if your museum is showing like this, where it says data not available NaN, easy enough for you to click in to submit data and submit that to us. And we then within a week or 2 will update the data hub. You can always send us an email to say, hey, I did this. Can you update it? And we can do that pretty quickly. So yeah, that's sort of the demonstration of the data hub. I wish I had more time, but see if there's any questions.
So let's see. We're getting a lot of thanks. I don't think we have any questions though, but if anyone does have questions, we'll hang on for just a few more minutes. We also, of course, you know how to reach us. Please feel free to email me directly. Sean, you want to put maybe your email in the chat if you're okay with that? People can reach out to you. We will be checking as you submit. For those that want to submit data or have information as you're going through and you submit, we will be checking your responses probably on a monthly basis, and those that will be relatively easy to update. So yeah, well, thank you all. And then there's Sean and John's email in the chat for you all. Feel free to reach out to them directly if needed, if you have any questions, particularly regarding the data, how it's collected, how it's being distributed here. And again, as Sean said, use the resources on here. It's called Data Hub for a reason, because we know it's not just this dashboard, but also the trends reports, which all can be used together. And as we get more information, we will be adding everything to this site. All right, Sean, I don't think we have any more questions. Anything else you all wanted to add?
I just want to say the hope is to continue or the plan, I should say, not hope. The plan is to continue to update this with new data. So as 2022, 2023, and so on come in, encourage, to reach out and ask any questions. I'm happy to show you guys a little bit more if you want to spend 15 minutes on the phone with me and play around with it so you get a little bit of an idea. But yeah, please, we're here to support you guys, and hopefully this is a resource that you guys feel would be helpful and useful for you.
Wonderful.
We'd also love to hear about any novel use cases you make of this, especially if you use it for advocacy purposes. I'm very interested in that.
Right, absolutely.
And if you see anything that says a big red flag to you that, oh, my data is not correct in this one place for whatever reason, We are meticulously checking everything, but it is possible because it's a lot of human error is possible. So please, reach out if you see something and you want it to get us to update it. Easy enough.
Absolutely. Michael Shanklin has a question. Can you run regional comps?
So that is actually something that we are hoping to do for version 2 of this, is to build in some more features like running a average for the region, for example. It's one of these things that right now is not possible with the Data Hub. However, it is something if you really need to do it, you can select a bunch of museums within that region. Although then it becomes very messy on the graph itself. The other feature that we're hoping to add is a direct download of those graphs. Right now, you can take screenshots of them. Feel free to use them in your board reports, advocacy, as John said, whatever, to show, oh, my museum is tracking nicely with the national median. This is good. Let's stay where we are and continue to grow like the national median is, or et cetera, et cetera. If there's other features that you want, reach out, let us know. We can think about it, how to build for future.
Absolutely. We are already thinking of ways we can build this out. So yes, but we wanted to get this out to you all. We are at the top of the hour. I think we addressed questions. Again, you know how to reach us. I would like to thank you all for joining us today. We are so happy to get this out to you. I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and thank you all again. Bye, y'all.